Welcome. I'm Athena. I serve as the evidence engine guiding this HB96 compliance training series. This course is designed to help Ohio agencies meet the requirements of House Bill 96, Section 9.64, while aligning with the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. Across 10 focused modules, you'll move from awareness to audit-ready governance, covering ethical accountability, evidence-based compliance, AI governance, operational policy execution, and real-world incident simulations. Every module applies the clarity, accountability, and proof framework to ensure your compliance is documented, defensible, and sustainable. Compliance is not a checkbox. It is a living system of trust.
Welcome to Module 1, The Origin of House Bill 96, the Trust Crisis. Let me start with a story, not from Washington, not from a textbook, from right here, Wood County. Not long ago, Wood County was hit with a ransomware attack. The total cost to taxpayers was over $10 million. $10 million. Think about that. I want you to pause for a second. That's not abstract. That's not IT budget. That's not someone else's department. That's parks, that's roads, that's schools, that's public services, that's trust. And here's the part that matters for us. It didn't start with a villain in a hoodie in a dark basement somewhere. It started with a vulnerability, maybe a click, maybe a mispatch, maybe a policy that looked good on paper, but it wasn't lived out in practice. And here's what I want you to hear very clearly. It used to be that we could say, well, that's an IT problem, but that's over. Today, every single person in this room is part of the attack surface. That's why I call this series the human firewall, because the strongest firewall in your organization is not a piece of hardware. It's judgment, it's ownership, it's accountability. And when those fail, taxpayers pay. So let me ask you something. If something like that happened here in your organization, and if your organization was the headline tomorrow, would you feel comfortable explaining to the public what went wrong? Or would you hope it wasn't your department? Let that sink in for a second. The first module is called The Origin of House Bill 96, the Trust Crisis, because House Bill 96 didn't emerge because lawmakers love compliance paperwork. Well, maybe they do. But it emerged because trust was shaken. When public institutions lose control of governance, it's not just a systems problem, it's a confidence problem. And once that confidence cracks, it's very hard to restore. So today we're not just talking about legislation, we're talking about stewardship. We're talking about what it means to handle public resources in a world where every email is a potential doorway, every click is a potential exposure, and every employee is either part of the vulnerability or part of the firewall. You have emotional skin in this game because the risks inside your organization are risks you personally carry. So if we do this right, if we understand why House Bill 96 exists, then compliance stops being a checklist and it becomes something much more powerful. It's a public promise, and that's where we're starting today. Let's build on what we just talked about. We've all watched trust in digital governance systems take hits in real time, not just nationally, but locally. When House Bill 96 was passed, it wasn't a tech upgrade bill. It was a trust repair bill. It was lawmakers recognizing something uncomfortable. Public systems were not always protecting the people that they serve in the way that they should. And when audits happen, whether they're internal, state level, or post-incident, the same patterns show up again and again. Controls that exist beautifully in theory, but are not demonstrated consistently in practice. Vendor access that everybody knows about, but nobody's formally documented. Critical decisions that made sense at the time, but 6 months later, no one can explain who approved what. And when accountability gets fuzzy, trust erodes fast. Not slowly, but fast. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a meeting where someone says, "Didn't we approve that already?" and the room goes quiet? That's not just awkward. That's risk. That's the early stage of a trust crisis. House Bill 96 is built to reverse that pattern. It raises the expectation that safeguards are not assumed, they're documented. Decisions are not implied, they're owned. And evidence isn't assembled only when someone asks for it, it exists continuously. In other words, transparency isn't optional, it's part of the job. And this is where the Compliance Evidence Playbook, the CEP as we call it, comes in. Now, I want you to think about this in human terms. The CEP is your organization's institutional memory, because here's the reality. People leave, people change, roles change, administrations shift, but accountability doesn't disappear just because somebody retires. The CEP captures the who, what, when, and why behind your security and governance work. It includes real artifacts, and we'll go into these in a lot of detail as we go forward in the training. But it has a policy governance ledger. Who owns what decisions? The technology asset inventory register. What systems are you actually responsible for? Incident log and reporting form. So what happened and how you responded? Because without evidence, even good work can sound like a promise instead of a fact. And the public doesn't fund promises. They fund proof. So here's a question I want you to sit with for a moment. When was the last time you saw a project lose credibility because nobody could produce documentation? That feeling, that loss of credibility, that's the heartbeat of House Bill 96. It's turning effort into evidence and turning evidence into public confidence. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If something went wrong tomorrow, would your agency be able to show, not explain, not defend, but show that governance was happening? That's what we're building toward. All right, now we move from the why to the how. Because here's the truth. House Bill 96 didn't invent compliance. It forced follow-through. Before the law, most agencies already had policies. Beautiful policies, well-written policies, policies in binders. But what was missing? Documentation, consistency, ownership. That gap between we're doing it and prove you're doing it. And if I could explain all of this in a couple of words, it's prove it. It's not good enough to say you're doing something anymore. You have to prove it. And that's where governance breaks down. That's the space that House Bill 96 is here to try to close. So we're going to translate some legal language into real world practices because let's be honest, this is legal language, right? Is it really practical day-to-day terms? So legislation is not always going to read like plain English. Nobody wakes up excited to decode statutory language, right? Except nerds like me sometimes. But our first objective is really simple. We'll translate it because if your team can't explain what a law means in practical terms, you can't operationalize it. So House Bill 96 is essentially saying document safeguards, define ownership, maintain evidence. And we're going to train on that all through this so you'll understand what that means. But not once, continuously. It's not theoretical, it's behavioral. You have to ingrain this inside of the culture of your organization. Then we're going to map policy intent to daily accountability. So let me ask you something. How many of you seen a policy that says access shall be reviewed quarterly or some training that you're required to do with some frequency? But nobody knows who's actually responsible for initiating the review, right? That's not a policy failure. That's an accountability gap. We're going to identify those and we're going to close those within your organization. And accountability gaps are where audits find oxygen, and when you feed fire oxygen, bad things happen. So mapping policy intent to daily accountability means asking, who owns it? How often are they responsible for checking it or logging it or noting it? Where is it recorded? Where do we put this verified ledger log that we have to do? Who verifies it? Governance isn't paperwork necessarily, it's clarity. Think about it that way. It's knowing who answers the question when somebody asks, show me. And our compliance evidence playbook is designed to be that central repository for that information. So I also talk about NIST 2.0 specifically. And what NIST is the National Institute of Standards. And there's a framework that you're given in the cybersecurity world that you can try to align to. It's guardrails if you want to think about it that way. And NIST 2.0 was certainly the framework that was used within the House Bill 96 legislation. So I'm going to go through it in simple terms, and you're going to hear these terms throughout the training. But for us, NIST isn't just a common playbook. It's helping your organization answer 5 basic questions. What are we protecting? What safeguards are in place? Can we detect issues when they happen? Do we know how to respond? Can we recover and improve? Because when NIST 2.0 says govern, for example, it's not mythical. It means who's responsible? What are the rules? How do we prove we're following them? It's the same thing the House bill is asking for. Governance is accountability with documentation. House Bill 96 takes that best practice and it adds weight. It says this isn't optional guidance anymore. This is expectation with consequences. And I'll talk about those consequences. You could have your funding cut as an organization. You could be publicly humiliated by the state, which is not a great thing, but it could happen. There's real teeth in the legislation. The approval process to pay ransomware in the event of a claim being denied by your insurance carrier has got to be made whole to the state. So if the taxpayers pay the money, your organization is responsible for making sure that gets paid back. That is significant. And think about it, $10 million? Who's got $10 million laying around at a state level agency to be able to pay that money back? There's very serious consequences here. If these bad actors take down your EMS or critical systems, then it's not a good thing. Lives are on the line. So this is very serious. So then we have a compliance evidence playbook, right? That's the practical way to demonstrate what you do inside your organization. And that's part of what we're going to train on in these modules. Every department in your organization carries governance evidence. IT, absolutely. But also HR, because you have training records, finance, you have vendor oversight and documentation, communications, if you have a communication officer, incident messaging of records, for example, your leadership, obviously. So the decision logs that you have, this isn't just an IT thing anymore. If ransomware hits tomorrow, think about this. It's not going to work if somebody asks your department, how did this audit happen? You've got to be able to demonstrate what you were doing to prevent it, that it didn't just happen because nobody cared, nobody was doing their job, right? You want to be able to prove you were. So it's not just showing your compliance, it's showing that you have a culture that understands and talks about these issues, that you have training awareness that you're doing right now. And it tells the story of whether governance is embedded or improvised. And you don't want to be improvising in these situations. So I want to put a question out there for you to think about. In your world, in your very specific role as you watch this, what does proof of governance actually look like? So think about it in this way. Maybe it's access reviews tied to role-based access controls, or multi-factor if you're responsible for that. Or maybe it's a policy ownership that's tracked in roles in a responsibility matrix. So if something happens, how you report it up through your organization, for example. Or maybe it's training completion logs that are captured over time and are in your personnel folder. Maybe it's incident reporting forms that show response or followed through if you're in EMS or fire or something like that. The point is this: we're trying to take the abstract thoughts about what this language says in legal terms and put it into real identifiable ways you can interact with it. So identifying the evidence you already have and the evidence that you still need. Because if Wood County taught us anything, it's not enough to believe you're secure. You must be able to demonstrate that you are governing. There's always going to be some accepted risk. But that's the difference between reaction and stewardship. So let's talk about something we don't always say out loud. Compliance isn't processes necessarily. It's really about people. Every safeguard you put in place, every policy, every technical control, every documented workflow succeeds or fails based on human action. And House Bill 96 recognizes that reality. Technology matters, firewalls matter, encryption matters, but when things move fast, when somebody is busy, when email looks urgent, when a vendor says, we need this right now, that's when culture shows up, and culture is human. So we're going to explore how human behavior shapes compliance outcomes. Let me ask you something honest. Have you ever clicked something faster than you should have? I know I'm personally guilty of that. Have you ever said, I'll document that later? We've all been there. Most compliance failures don't start with bad intent. They start with hurry, or assumption, or fatigue, and that's why behavior matters more than policy language. House Bill 96 leans into this idea. The strongest security control is the decision someone makes in a moment. Let me give you a real example. In one agency, a staff member received a phishing email. It looked legit, urgent, time-sensitive, but something clicked in her memory. A phrase from training: pause, verify, protect. And you'll hear me say that often. Pause, verify, protect. She didn't click. She double-checked the sender. She reported it. That one small decision prevented a breach. Not $1 million incident, not a public headline, just prevention. And here's the powerful part. That decision didn't just prevent damage, it became evidence. It showed training was working. It showed culture was working. It showed the system wasn't relying on luck. It was relying on people who understood why it mattered, and that report got logged. It ties into your cyber awareness and training policy. It ties into your incident log register and reporting form. It ties to your incident response playbook. Now compliance is not theory, it's traceable behavior. So we're going to link ethics and accountability to data stewardship next. So we'll make it more personal because those are just some words. What does that mean? When we talk about data stewardship, it can sound abstract, but what are we really talking about? We're talking about taxpayer information, payroll data, health records, student record, vendor contracts. We're temporary caretakers of information that belongs to somebody else. That's the ethical weight. Ethics in compliance isn't about punishment, it's about responsibility. It's asking, if this was my information, would I be satisfied with how it's protected? And House Bill 96 reinforces that stewardship. It's not optional, it's expected. So how do we build empathy for public responsibility? What does that mean? I want to ask you something that may feel simple, but it isn't. What motivates someone to follow a compliance rule when nobody's watching? Is it fear of discipline? Maybe. Is it habit? Possibly. Is it pride, professional identity, team loyalty, public service mindset? Answer that for yourself. What does that mean for you? Because whatever that answer is, that's what you build a culture around as an organization. Integrity in public service isn't abstract. It's what the public experiences when systems hold up. Decisions are defensible. The right thing happens, even in the small moments, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's easier not to. So, coming back to the concept of the human firewall, remember how we started today. Wood County didn't lose $10 million because the technology failed alone. It failed somewhere in a chain of human decisions. And the reverse is also true. Breaches are prevented because someone chose to act. That's the human firewall, not fear, not policy, not software, judgment. And House Bill 96 is built around reinforcing that judgment with documentation so the organization can prove its learning. Nobody's going to be perfect. Nobody's expected to be. But as long as you're working toward a goal and continuing to learn and improve, you're going to be fine. I want you to take 30 seconds silently. Think about your specific role. Do that while I'm talking. What small decisions do you make regularly that carry more risk than people realize? So whatever your answer is there, think about that. That's where ownership starts. So let's be honest for a minute. Nobody enjoys audits, but failing one, that's a whole different kind of pain. There's the uncomfortable meeting, the follow-up letters, the corrective action plans, and that's just the surface. When documentation is incomplete or inconsistent, it's not just awkward, it creates real exposure, financial exposure, operational exposure, leadership exposure, and ultimately public exposure. Because when an audit finds gap, the message isn't they tried, the message becomes they weren't ready. And once that perception lands publicly, it is hard to unwind. So we'll tie that to a bigger risk. We talk a lot about the cost of cyber incidents, ransomware, data loss, recovery expenses, but the deeper cost is trust. Wood County wasn't just a financial event, it was a confidence event. Once the public believes their systems aren't well managed or well defended, it takes time and constant evidence and consistent evidence to earn that confidence back. That's why House Bill 96 raises that expectation. It says, don't just have safeguards, show them. Don't just react well, document it. Don't just claim governance, demonstrate it. And that's not red tape, that's protection. The Compliance Evidence Playbook is a preventative control. This is where Compliance Evidence Playbook earns its keep. Think of the CEP as your early warning system. When it's current, it tells you where things are drifting before an auditor does. If training completion rates are slipping, you're going to see it in your cybersecurity awareness and training records and your annual policy review log. If incidents aren't being captured clearly, that gap shows up fast in your incident log and incident response documentation. And you have a civic responsibility to maintain this. If an audit trail of retention isn't consistent, that's exactly what your audit trail retention report is designed to defend. Documentation isn't paperwork for paperwork's sake. It's prevention, it's visibility, it's self-correction. And a mature organization isn't going to wait for audits to find that weakness. You're going to use that documentation to find them first. And we're going to clearly define roles and responsibility and review frequency for this as we go forward. So again, I'll ask you something. What's harder, doing compliance right the first time or explaining to an auditor why you didn't? I've never met anybody say, I really enjoyed writing a corrective action plan. Think about that. But preparation protects your agency. It also protects your credibility, because when something does go wrong, and eventually something always does, you want to be able to say, we had governance in place. We had safeguards documented. We responded consistently. And here's the evidence. That's not defensive posture. That's leadership. So weak compliance isn't about paperwork. It's about exposure. Strong compliance isn't about perfection. It's about proof. And the compliance evidence playbook is how you move from hoping you're ready to knowing you are. So when we talk about trust as the ultimate outcome, at its core, House Bill 96 isn't just about cybersecurity. It's about restoring the faith in public institutions and how they operate. Because think about it. Every safeguard you put in place, every control you test, every access review you complete, every incident you document, every policy you update, it all rolls up to one larger outcome, trust. And trust doesn't come from mission statements. It doesn't come from press releases. It doesn't come from saying, we take this seriously. Trust comes from evidence. That's what the CEP represents. The Compliance Evidence Playbook isn't just a folder structure, it's proof. It's the visible record that your agency isn't only meeting a requirement, it's honoring the public's right to transparency and accountability. And when auditors walk in, or when the media calls, or when leadership asks for clarity, you don't scramble, you show. That's the difference between confidence and defensiveness. So tying it back to NIST, this is where NIST 2.0 gives us shared language. When we say identity or identify, we mean understand what we're protecting and where the risk lives. That shows up in your technology asset inventory, your risk assessment reports. And when we say recover, we mean when something tests us, an incident, an audit finding a mistake, we can restore operations and restore confidence quickly. That's your continuity plan. And we're tying this all back to what's inside of that evidence playbook. Your backup and restoration procedures. NIST gives us structure. House Bill 96 gives it expectation. The CEP gives it the proof. So let me say something very clearly. Compliance is not a department. It's not just IT. It's not just leadership. It's not just HR. Compliance is a shared civic duty. Trust builds slowly, and every entry in the CEP, every documented review, every logged decision, every captured incident is one more brick in the wall of public confidence. And here's the part that matters most. The public doesn't get to see your policies. They experience your outcomes. They experience whether services stay up, whether their data stays safe, whether mistakes are handled responsibly, whether leadership is transparent. That's what they're going to remember. So I'll end Module 1 with this. House Bill 96 gave us the framework. The CEP gives us the proof. Our actions give it meaning. So think about this. This series, the Human Firewall series, is about making sure that meaning shows up in daily decisions. Not someday, not after an audit, every day. I want to leave you with one simple idea. House Bill 96 didn't just add new rules, it brought accountability back to the center of public service. And that means, because when accountability drifts to margins, trust follows it. House Bill 96 pulls it back into focus, not as punishment, not as bureaucracy, but as an expectation. And the Compliance Evidence Playbook is what makes that accountability real. It turns controls into confidence, it turns records into reassurance, it turns internal discipline into external trust. And it's how you show clearly and consistently that your agency is doing what it says it's doing, not occasionally, not when audited, but continuously. When you walk out of this room, I don't want you thinking about compliance as fear of an audit. I want you to think about it as trust made visible. Think about that. Because the public isn't just trusting you with data, they're trusting you with their privacy, their services, their livelihoods, their dignity, and your documentation is how you protect that trust. And it's how you prove you deserve it. So thank you. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for the stewardship you bring to it. And remember, the CEP isn't just a playbook, it's your legacy of integrity. Think about that. Now, before we close completely, let me show you where we're headed, because this is module 1 of 10, and everything we talk about today sets the foundation for what comes next. So we have ethics in action, the oversight chain, human responsibility, risk and reward, and building trust. And what these mean. Ethics in action is how daily decisions shape governance outcomes. The oversight chain of who owns what and how accountability flows. Human responsibility, the human firewall in practice. Risk and reward, understanding exposure and incentives, and building trust, the measurable outcome of disciplined governance. And through it all, the CEP bridges law, ethics, and public service. That's the through line. Law sets expectation, ethics shape behavior, but public service defines purpose. And the CEP will connect them all. The series isn't about adding work, it's about elevating awareness, because when compliance becomes culture, confidence follows, and confidence is what sustains public institutions. In closing, years from now, nobody will remember this slide deck. They're not going to remember the bullet points. They won't remember the quiz questions. They'll remember whether the agency was ready when it mattered, whether services stayed up, whether data stayed protected, whether leadership showed up with clarity and evidence. House Bill 96 is the framework. The CEP is the story you can defend, and every entry you make, every decision you document, every safeguard you verify becomes part of that story. So write it well, because trust is built one documented decision at a time. So thank you for your time, and most importantly, thank you for the work that you do, because stewardship isn't abstract, it's daily, it's human, and it matters. Up next in Module 2, we'll talk about the human conscience clause, and we'll talk about what drives the decisions you make before the documentation.